Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. John Meyer is our presenter today, and he's been thinking about the division of a finite pie into an increasing number of slices since he was in high school. I'm guessing that was in the 1960s. That is longer than anyone else I know personally. In my case, I was in my late 30s, maybe 15 years later, before reading Garrett Hardin's The Tragedy of the Commons and Integrating Population and the Environment. John and I met via a mutual acquaintance, Madeline Weld, when we were both included in a small group email discussion. Madeline has presented on this forum herself on a related topic. As John has run a business in the real world, his thoughts are not those from an ivory tower. Be prepared for a well-grounded talk, and please begin any questions in the chat with a capital Q. Welcome, John.
Okay, thanks very much, Stephen, for moderating this. Basically, I mean, we're failing on all levels, I think. And we keep on with the same message that we need growth. But growth has given us put us in the position that we're in now. Both the good news is that the Chinese population is declining, the Japanese population is declining, but this is decried in the mainstream media where their economies are depicted as collapsing. That's not correct. Japan still maintains a very, very high level of income equality, and as well, their per capita incomes is still are still going up slightly. So it may be a disaster for some elements of the economy, but it is not a disaster for the society. And so I think we need to change the conversation, and by we need environmentalists and academics and real economists to stand up and say we're measuring the wrong thing. And we're even starting to hear that from bank economists now in Canada, which is a real change. Basically, no one has benefited. Very few have benefited in Canada from a larger commercial economy over the last 50 years, and certainly it's been an environmental disaster and a rolling disaster. As if you visited southern or central Ontario, seeing the sprawl that's taking over the best farmland in this country. So the blockage really is the media and the politicians that grow out of the media, and we're simply going to have to lean on them, be more effective in leaning on them to become biophysically and socially literate. Okay, on this very topic, there was a paper out recently on rethinking scientific engagement, which I believe just wants to draw scientists and academics into social action. That's very uncomfortable ground, I think, very soft ground for academics who like to be locked in their field of expertise. But they have to recognize that they're operating into an information vacuum, and the expertise which they thought would be absorbed by society and the political, the social conversation, the political policy making just isn't happening. We're being blocked. So politicians and media constantly represent the economy as the national welfare. It isn't. Canada's had the highest rate of economic growth in the OECD, and our level of equality from the 1960s to now has plummeted from number 2 in the early 60s to the mid 30s now. And debt levels have soared, et cetera. I think we don't have to go over all of that. So the objective here is to break down the growth lobby into identifiable elements. Business can generally be assumed to be pro-growth. Everybody wants a bigger market to sell into, but a few people don't just want it, they need it. And that's what I'm going to try and break out today. There's a number of types of growth. There's growth from inflation, printed money, there's population growth, and there's consumption growth. Most businesses benefit from consumption growth, and many benefit from population growth, but very few benefit from inflation. But the few that do extremely well with it. Most businesses don't like to see their costs inflate, but there are groups who do very well. So I'm trying to break down the real economy, the people who really produce product that we need, the farmers, the manufacturers, the educators, health workers, government workers, even used car salesmen, people who have a legitimate part in the goods and services production, which can be classified as the real wealth production. And then there's the money processing, where some groups are able to make money from money, not from producing wealth, but from acquiring it. But there are obviously legitimate financial services. In fact, financial services are critical to a well-lubricated, healthy commercial economy. But that industry has, I think, fallen into the area of money printing and leveraging activities, which produce no real wealth, but result in that group acquiring a huge amount of wealth at the expense of everybody else. So wealth created from money itself, if there's more money in the society, effectively that is a tax on the people who actually produce real wealth. So stable market doesn't mean a stagnant market. Here we see General Motors, they produce real wealth. They even produce some pretty damn impressive cars in the Volt and the Bolt. And of course, they've chosen not to continue those anymore. But General Motors their sales have declined. They're not going out of business. They're still paying Mary Barra a pretty penny, and they're still doing research and continuing operations. So if you had a stable or even mildly declining market in the automotive sector, you would still have the cut and thrust of competitive market dynamics. So some companies are going to be doing better, some companies are going to be doing worse, but some companies can certainly do well. You can look at Tesla's sales over the last few years. They're just astounding. So if you have the product and can deliver it with the right marketing, or just filling a screaming need, you can do well, and the size of the market doesn't have to be growing. So a stable population brings a shift in consumption, not an end to it. And this new consumption will likely be and needs to be socially and environmentally far less energy and resource intensive. But the first step on the path to sustainability is to stop growing. And this idea will be attacked in the mainstream media because it is Armageddon for some types of businesses that have a huge influence in the media. So we need to identify the interests which push the growth agenda. We can't just say business is the problem. Business isn't the problem. They want a bigger market they can live with, and I think they're getting used to the idea that they can live with a stable market or even a declining market. So different parts of the business community have very different amounts of skin in the growth game. So we have to identify and isolate the people who absolutely live and die on growth and inflation, the inflation that causes. And those are the people that are basically controlling the narrative at this present time. and we have to understand what inflation is. Inflation, inflation can be caused in a number of different ways, but it ends up with the end user paying more. Are they paying more because the real costs have increased? Or are they paying more because of speculation and money printing have inflated costs? So what we typically tend to focus on is the impacts of the resource depletion, like the in the bottom of this slide, the EROI mountain, where you can see that the energy returned on energy invested. We're now on the backside of that mountain, and the glory days were when we were getting 70 or 100 barrels of oil out of the ground for every barrel of energy worth of effort we put into it. Now we're probably down into the 17 to 1 area. So costs have to be higher. If you want to boil oil out of sand, it costs more than having it blow out of a hole you drilled. And same with fracking. So the costs now are higher as deplete, with fisheries, you have to sail out further for a smaller catch. And I think they're having a hard time here in Yarmouth with this year's lobster catch. But anyway, then there's a real other source of cost increases, supply chain interruptions, Red Sea conflict, COVID, and extreme weather. These push up real costs. Also, repatriation of manufacturing will result in more domestic manufacture, will result in higher costs, but we will be, because we're paying living wages and we're absorbing the full environmental costs that are not included in cheap labor and coal-driven economies. So we need to understand the source. And the sticker price that the consumer pays, the end user pays, must be the full all-in price in order for the commercial market to be relevant in making social and environmental decisions. Inflation. I'm going to blow through this, but there's a lot here. The red line here, that's interest rates versus the Dow Jones. I mean, you free money, you throw barrels of money out into the street and a number of things go up. Here's the Dow Jones going up, and also housing prices soared as well. By printing money, asset inflation ensues. And in the stock market, maybe it's partial demand, but in the housing market, you can't, it's highly unlikely you'll get an inflating housing market or real estate market without demand. And that's another critical factor that if you're running the great inflation scam, you need to boost the demand. So they're very pro-growth, pro-population growth, high immigration, et cetera, to generate that, because that's the biggest moneymaker for any of these groups that profit from inflation. So here we go. Here is a great graph by Robert Shiller. How often do you see the real home prices, the inflated valuations on the same chart with the real cost? That's highly illuminating. So thank you for that. And we can see this difference here as that's money on the table. That is money on the table, and into whose pockets does it go? It will go into higher mortgages. It'll go into profits from speculators, higher rents, and this kind of thing. So it'll go into the pockets of the wealthy and the boomers. People like the boomers, we benefited substantially from this. So if our house price went up say we made $600,000 on our house. We're really good parents, and we help out our kids. Say we give them, we love our kids. Maybe we give them $200,000 to for the house that they can just barely afford. And but the trouble is, to pay off the rest of the house, the inflated price, they're going to have to earn $1.5 million to $2 million to make up that 600,000 in mortgage payments and interest. So money printing inflation contributes no real wealth, yet the businesses which promote inflationary policies acquire huge amounts of wealth. And it may look as though we're doing well, but we're only doing well because we've taxed our children. The benefit that the boomers get is being paid for by our kids. And this is highly predictable. Of course, here the government is predicting in 1986 low rate of immigration. Maybe it was approaching balance, which would be as many coming in as going out. And here is the high rate of immigration. So you need 50% more houses with this. So high housing demand. And what's that going to do? Well, it's going to demand is going to drive up the valuations of houses. And here we predicted the old zero population growth. We predicted that, okay, in 1990, that was, I think it was 40%, 41% of income went to housing in 1990. We said that by 2036, with high immigration, we'd be spending over 70% of our income on housing. But if we maintain balanced immigration, in which our population, Canada's population basically now would be stabilized at 28 million, maybe we'd be in at around 42%. So essentially no change. So what in fact happened? So we've had mass immigration. We've added 12 million people to the population. Population of is 40 million now, not 28. And we're paying slightly over 60% of our incomes for housing. And so many highly qualified professional people really can't buy a house in this country. It's astounding, but it was highly predictable. So what does the self-serving bank and speculator and developer, what would they like? This is the curve they love to see. The residential mortgages, it's just an indicator of what's happening with prices in real estate generally. Beautiful curve if you're on that side of it. And what's the scale of potential, of profit potential? Say a news media, they're worth about $1 billion in revenue, defense industry, $7 billion, tobacco industry, the big bad boys, $19 billion, oil and gas, even bigger bad boys, $94 million. But no one mentions the money that's on the table by this kind of inflation. And certainly developers, banks, et cetera, don't put that 280 billion in their own pockets, but a lot of it ends up in their pockets after going through our pockets. So that's the scam. And you need to drive that inflation, you need demand. That's the key part. So if there isn't demand, if there's stability, their business model falls apart. GM's model, business model doesn't fall apart. Farmer Brown's model doesn't fall apart, but it does if you need that growth and inflation. So there are two ways of creating excuses for printing money. Of course, one is demand for mortgages, and the other is another large one, I should say, is if you happen to, this isn't really true of Canada because our trade balance, it goes one way or the other. We're not in a permanent deficit position. The US is. And if you have a nation which is in permanent deficit, the people who are of trade, the people who are supplying the widgets and the resources to you, they get paid. And they get paid in two ways. One, by the things that you do make and export, but that only covers half of the cost of the imports, or part of the cost of the imports. The other part is uh, uh, what you own. So you pay through what you create, what you produce, and also by what you own. And so when the people take your promissory notes, which is essentially US dollars that have been printed, it comes back, and probably in the form of foreign ownership of your land and corporations, etc. So there's a huge shift that isn't obvious, and that's I think your $500 70-inch flat screen TV, such a fantastic deal, $500. But if you knew that your rent was going up $12 a month for the rest of your life, would you make that decision? So we need to have sticker price transparency. That's what I'm basically calling for. And some work was done on the cost of real estate inflation, because even if you paid off your house, you pay for real estate inflation in everything you buy uh, and every service you consume, because businesses are paying for that. Margaret Kennedy did a study on that, and she came up with some really eye-watering numbers, but we need to know, and we don't know. Okay. Sticker price has to be the full price. We have to understand the sources of inflation, and whether it's real, then we can deal with it. Those are the problems we want to deal with. We have to deal with because they're existential. Monetary inflation is us pumping bullets into our feet. And it shouldn't be happening. If we had a well-functioning, responsible financial system, monetary inflation wouldn't be happening. So from a real economy lens, with the people here, I mean, obviously we're highly biophysically oriented. And when we criticize someone and make our points to people, it's very difficult, I think often, for us to make a connection. So I think you have to attempt to get into their language. When I talk to businessmen, I talk about costing systems. Costing system is something businessmen understand, and they can relate to that. So in the real economy, we need to bring up practical we have to look at what we want in real physical terms as opposed to dollar metrics. So once we get rid of non-inflationary or inflationary banking, maybe we can also say that big pharma is not, this is a personal list, by the way, you can't have companies controlling research in the public good. And you can't have cheap labor employers dictating immigration policy, which involves cheap labor involves scores of billions annually in subsidies to the cheap labor employers. Can't have fast food industry dictating children's diets, etc. But we need the real cost to be built into the final costs, and the goal no longer is to be bigger, turning more cash, but to be better with higher levels of equality, job quality and productivity. Remember that you don't hear the word productivity too much anymore, but Canada has lagged. Obviously, we've been submerged in cheap labor, and if you've got access to cheap labor, you just don't improve your methods or make more investment. So we need this process to begin before we can start reducing our environmental footprint. And to my great joy, an end to growth also puts an end to parasitic business models. It'll give us healthy, stable communities, affordable housing, minimal debt, higher per capita incomes and equality levels, lower consumption. So an apocalypse for speculators and all the people I don't think have an excuse to exist in an economic sense. So what does this look like? Socially, this is what it looks like for us, the producers, the contributors, and this is what it looks like for the media that's pushing growth on behalf of their sponsors. It's Armageddon. But if we know what we're doing, if we adopt the proper policies, we can adapt very quickly to a no-growth economy. But we just have to recognize that you're going to lose some sectors, and but we can do that, I think, very willingly, recognizing that these sectors don't contribute anything. So for activizing, is that a word? Activating academics and scientists, it's tough to know where to jump in because you'll be using terminology at a level below that which you're used to using. You're used to being an expert in your field. Now you're stepping out into an area, well, you've got an opinion and this is how you think it works, but you don't have peer-reviewed papers to back you up that often. But what we're facing socially is a fair amount of chaos. The bank economists are criticizing immigration levels, while those same banks are financing the Century Initiative, which is a mass immigration lobby in Canada. I just see us not knowing what we're talking about often. There isn't a tremendous amount of coordination, and nowhere, although this is off topic, the most frightening example of that is the U.S. southern border, where the Republican states, are now supplying Bradley fighting machines and Abrams tanks, which are frontline full-scale war armor, to Texas. I don't, for the National Reserve, I don't for a moment think this is going to result in any kind of conflict, but it's a signal that you have tremendous conflict between different levels of government. And we need to attempt to offer some real world fundamental cause and effect commentary. And I think we need to do that in a semi-coordinated fashion, not between huge groups, but just several people. I mean, what does it take to generate a response from a media corporation or politicians? One signature isn't going to do it. Is 3 or 4 signatures required on a letter demanding a response? Or is it 200? I don't know. That's a question. If anyone has an answer for that, please let me know. But whatever it is, the chaos we see is actually a galaxy of conflicts, of wrong assumptions and mistakes that deserve mention. But if you're educated, if you can see the biophysical reality, the social realities, and get comfortable with the metrics, there's just it's a tremendously rich environment in which to comment, and we need people making grounded statements, well-grounded statements, not political. But to do it also helps to put a face on the growth lobby, the people who are really running this country and the West in general, or our consumer economies into the ground. And they are starting to develop a face. So, but we need to have people doing their job. The departments of environment have to be doing environmental reviews of population growth. Journalistic integrity has been left behind, social responsibility. There are a lot of scientists sitting in the fence in academia, I think, probably clutching the mahogany, hoping to say nothing wrong. But it is, after all, their job to make educated, fact-based statements, and it's the media's job to give access to well-informed opinions. The odds of this happening, you can see here, I think would get a good laugh in the media boardrooms, but I live in hope. And we have to point out that everybody's heard this. GDP is a cash flow metric. It doesn't deal with assets, well-being, environmental health. It's only paid activity. It doesn't distinguish between productive activity and unproductive activity, and it doesn't distinguish between good activity and bad activity. It's got no social metrics in it. If a hurricane wipes out a Florida town, the GDP goes up because there's more economic activity. We don't deal well with the loss of assets well. It doesn't cover that well. And the people who created the system of national accounts, which grew into the GDP, GNP, it was created as a tax system to be able to, for the government to be able to develop a system of equitable taxation in a rapidly growing and increasingly complex economy. And they emphatically and explicitly stated that it should not be used for the formation of national policy. But in the media now and in most politicians' lips, that's all you hear, the need for growth. The course we are on now are defined by the Century Initiative. Growth, rapid as growth as we can manage. Loblaws crave more promotion. I just love that. It's on the handlebars of the shopping carts. If you look, crave more. That's going to solve all our problems. And there was one group, a bunch of economists, or a couple of economists 40 or 50 years ago, running around saying that humanity can have 1% annual population growth for 7 million years. I have no idea how they came up with 7 million years. But if you do the math and say that there's, say, 10 to the 80 power of 85 atoms in the universe, you run out of atoms in 25,000 years. I don't say run out of atoms in humans. You have more humans than atoms in 25 years. So I see that as a physical limit, and it would happen a good time, a good period of time before the 25,000 years. We have to invest heavily, which means reducing our consumption and turning it into beating our plowshares, not into guns, although we have to do that as well now, unfortunately, but beating them into solar panels and wind turbines. But the transition to sustainability to this point is proven to be not economically viable. The investments in renewable energy typically don't have the high returns of fossil fuel plays. And when you look at it from a strictly economic point of view, saving the planet makes no economic sense. So we have to have a market. We have to know what our costs are. We have to know where inflation is coming from, and we have to structure the market through incentives and penalties, positive and negative incentives, to deliver the investment we need to get ahead of this. And that's but we have to have clear fundamentals. We have to have clear costs and a good idea of what is going to be a probable comeback, payback, I should say. So what we have to do, in your own words, again, a personal list, but we need to start stepping out, encouraging academics to step out from their preferred and safe fields of expertise to get rid of the really egregious attack, really the egregiously wrong campaigns we encounter. 9,000 SUVs, it's a wonderful technological achievement, but it's you may as well buy a gas SUV. We need to downplay and poo-poo vainglorious consumption, and we need to step away from cheap labor, mass immigration, population growth. We need to build only energy positive buildings, and we need to have the right metrics and useful information. That's all we're talking about. We don't talk about the wrong metrics. And we need to break the link between various industries and self-serving lobby groups and the political media cartel, if you will, because we can't move past, we can't implement useful public policy if it's being controlled by a process. The national conversation is being controlled by groups who will be destroyed by the solutions that to our problems. Okay, so scientists have to step up and step out, and we have to recognize, I think it's widely recognized, that democracy is failing. The alternatives don't look that good. So we need to make democracy work somehow, and we have to identify the interests which are derailing the transition to a decarbonized and sustainable society. And even though the media might be owned and controlled to a large extent by the growth lobby, people within the media still, many people, not all, think of themselves as journalists, and they need to be approached on a basis of ethics. And we need to make social policy biophysically coherent and separate from the commercial economy. We have to recognize the commercial economy for what it is and the limits of both it and the metrics we use to measure it. GDP is a great metric, it really is, but it applies to the commercial economy, not its health or the health of the people in the country. So thank you. And here once again is that paper if you want to look at it. And I'd like to make two comments at this time. First of all, the Q question issue on the chat group. If you're going to ask a question, make Steve's job a lot easier. And also, I'd like to bring up a subtopic here on AI. Now, I don't want to, if we can deal with AI questions at the very end of the question period, rather than using it as a red herring. But my daughter suggested to me a couple of weeks ago when I was saying I was having trouble drawing this all together, she said, well, why don't you just use AI? And I'm not going to do that, but it would have been interesting to find out if there was bias. Would AI say the same thing that I was going to say? And I did run, after I finished the presentation, I did run AI to see what it would come up with. And it was frightening because it was so well written. It was so fluid, so fluent. The grammar was tremendous. Was excellent. There was a slight difference in what I would have said, but the fact that my well-educated daughter, who's good at research, would turn to the crutch of AI that spells immense danger, I think, for us. And even if AI were to suggest a solution, and even if it was the perfect solution, would we believe it? Could we execute it? So that's a topic. And Stephen, if you that's the finish now. And Stephen, if you could come in and
Yeah, I'm
handle.
here, John. I think you should stop sharing your screen if you can figure that one out. There
Yeah.
we
Okay.
go. Well, I was going to ask you a question about money systems as part of the driver of growth.
Uh-huh.
Um, However, it's so basic. I think if people, the audience here can just remember ancient history where there was mainly barter and also very low stable populations, and much growth didn't occur. And you did eventually get to the point talking about debt, uh, looking for debt to, you wanted debt to go down and the equality to go up. And I put a big question mark at the end saying, well, we're so far underwater in both of those situations and headed in the wrong direction that I can't imagine how it could be reversed. I know you're trying to be hopeful, but I don't need an answer now. I want to see what other people have to say. Um, Bill Reese was in line first with some comments, but there are also questions. I'd like him to jump in, and Art Hunter would be on deck, and then Dave Doherty after that. And after that, I think we're wide open.
Okay.
So, Bill, if you're still there, please jump in.
Yeah, I'm still here. I didn't really have a question. I did make some comments.
Right.
So I guess the first one had to do with the cost issue. I'm a great believer in full cost pricing, but if you really take this seriously, then nobody could afford almost everything we take to be necessity today. The cost of computers would go up astronomically, cell phones and so on and so forth. So that's why it's just a non-starter politically. Do you have any comment about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, full costing won't come in instantly, although we would need it. We needed it, a long time ago. We can't implement it quickly. It's like if you thought EVs were the solution to a significant part of the CO2 problem, we can't produce enough. So nothing is going to happen instantly. I think you have to get the awareness going and fine tune it and incentivize as in a dynamic fashion. But I think you have to recognize that nothing is going to happen quickly, maybe not happen quickly enough. And when you change prices, what you do causes prices to change. You have to protect two groups of people. One, the people who are going to be crushed by a change in prices, and two, the people who are going to lose their jobs because their industry is no longer viable. So you have to be very aware of those two groups, and then you can move. You move as quickly as you can, but you have to recognize that you're going to hurt a lot of people, inconvenience a lot of people, but you have to avoid crushing people and communities. And if you can do it well, I think you'll have enough political capital to execute it. If it's clumsy, if it's arbitrary, if it's all of a sudden, then you're going to lose political credibility, and the process will grind to a halt.
Thank you. One other question, I guess it follows on. You mentioned Tesla. I recently read that 3/4 of Tesla's profitability is directly from subsidies, and that the business wouldn't even exist in the absence of subsidies. And I presume that also follows with other EVs. If you think also of the wind power industry, it wouldn't exist without subsidies. And about 10 minutes of online research would show that many of the manufacturers that are on the verge of bankruptcy and major power projects are being canceled because of the lack of profitability and the fear that the subsidies are going to fall out. So can we make this transition, if there is a transition, that's a whole other question.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the point I was getting to. Basically, everything is subsidized now. I mean, fossil fuels or biofuels, ethanol in North America, the ROI of that is somewhere between 0.7 and 1.4. In other words, why bother? You're using as much energy to produce it as you get out of it. But financially, it's been made viable through all kinds of different subsidies, but it's a subsidization of a bad policy.
Yeah, well, that's what we do.
Yeah, and with Tesla, I don't know what the real numbers are there, but I do know they produced immense amounts of technology, useful research, etc. And I think it comes down to a very unfortunate situation where to make these slow, I call it slow money, but low payoff projects viable, you have to charge more for energy. And that's incredibly unpopular. And you have to incentivize more negative incentives on gasoline. That's another popular one. And you have to incentivize people to put in energy efficient systems like geothermal storage and geothermal heat pumps, which Art and I are, great promoters. Yes, energy is going to cost more, but we're going to be using a lot less of it. But overall costs are going to go up and consumption is going to go down. So that's a difficult proposition to sell. And for that to work, I think people have to be terrorized either, to forego consumption, and they have to be terrorized by something like thoughts of Putin rolling over your border, so you have to build tanks or something, or the climate impacts getting so bad that people say we've got to do something, and maybe at that point it's too late. So not a lot of room for optimism, but I think the mechanism is increasing costs of the good and costs are going to increase, but make sure the cost of renewable energy goes up much more slowly than that of fossil fuels.
Yeah.
No good, no silver bullet.
Okay, Art Hunter, you're next.
Okay. I just want to thank Bill Reese for taking my question and getting it so well expressed. But I do want to comment on the transition from the existing GDP metric to gross happiness or what other index is proposed and put forward. We do have the, as you termed them, the self-serving banks, which I really like that because it depicts what I call rob from the poor and give to the rich,
Yeah.
and but a process to transform from where we are to the systems you described so well. Do we have time? There is a time element here, which and the existing powers are going to resist this tremendously. Could you comment on that?
Oh yeah. Well, they've got lobbies to resist it. They've got their people in the banks who have served on as editors in newspapers. It's highly cartel may be the wrong word, but picking that apart is going to be very tough. And to do it legally, I think you'd have to have some kind of law like the U.S. RICO law, which deals with extremely complex, multifaceted criminal organizations. And I do put it in the criminal area. Now, before I get sued, I'll just say I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know what criminal means. But the what did we do as a nation? How did leaders make decisions before the GDP became the prime metric? Okay, we talked about nation building, about people doing well with building railroads, etc. Now there was plenty of corruption to go around all through history, no problem there, no change there. But the decision making was different, and now we are stuck with a single focus, which is just so easy. I mean, the other problem with GDP is that it's the economy, that we call it the economy, but it's not the real economy, it's the commercial economy, and we have to distinguish that. It's a great tool for the commercial economy. It really is fantastic. Huge amount of information for companies, great for decision making, but it's displaced a lot of the tools that real leaders used to use all the time. Like, how are the people doing? How is this going to work in the long term? And it's unfortunate because it's become it was a tool that's become a god, and we have to recognize that it's just a tool.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Dave Dougherty, you're next, and Paul Beckwith is on deck.
Hi, just taking care of something administrative in the background. Okay. So my question regards something that you said about how research is being done. I just have to move back to it here just a second. For decades, we've been shifting the responsibility for research into the private sector.
Yep.
The argument's been that if research is worth doing, some firm or firms will fund it. And if no firm will fund it, it is not worth doing.
Right.
What do you think of that approach?
Well, it's exactly right from a corporate point of view. But if you look at COVID, I've paid a lot of attention to, I think it's Dr. John Campbell, and I think he saved thousands of lives in his coverage of COVID early on. I think he's gone off the rails slightly, but he makes a few great points. And one was, he was a big supporter of vitamin D and masks and ventilating workspaces and low viral, you're going to get a viral load, keep it low. But vitamin D, say vitamin D was a prime asset tool in defeating or minimizing the impact of COVID. And I think medically, I think that's established. Vitamin D costs next to nothing. And I don't, so what company is going to go out and spend $20 or $30 million on a study to demonstrate that vitamin D is indeed an excellent something that it's going to reduce your chances of getting severe COVID? Well, they can't make money on it. Like a pill is what, 1/10 of a cent or to make or something, and you sell it for 1 cent. So no one's going to do that research. But we need that research. We need research which is going to come up with the cheap solutions, with the solutions that make sense for the society, just not the ones that are going to make those individual research or production companies rich. And that's what we need. If you leave it to self-serving interests, they'll go bankrupt if they come up with a cheap solution. So that's my answer. Basically, don't ask the tobacco industry to do a health study on the harm or benefits of smoking.
Satisfied, Dave?
So I'm trying to situate that in terms of the world around me, and I think perhaps it goes partway, at least, to explaining why it is that we are lacking solutions, practical solutions, in so many areas.
Yeah.
Our focus is wrong. Our focus is not on solving problems, but on making money.
Exactly. You want to solve problems in such a way that you maximize profit. And solutions that are cheap, you're out of a job. And a career. I'd say, I'm so proud that I solved the COVID problem, but my company went bankrupt. You're done.
Yeah, there are a lot of companies around that have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, Paul Beckwith and Rob Samulak is on deck.
Yes, thanks for the great talk there, John. So
Thanks.
just today, interestingly enough, there's an article in the mainstream Canadian news about Canada's fertility rate dropping yet again. So I think it's about 1.33, and we know that replacement is 2.1. And then the article goes on to say, well, yes, but we're making it all up with the huge immigration. I mean, Canada's population is hitting record levels and so on. So I guess as far as population stability, and I think the lowest fertility rate is South Korea or something, which is about 0.79 is the fertility rate. So, I mean, the country's going to disappear if that rate continues, right? So, I mean, but countries are penalized, and economists, say it's a horrendous catastrophe for for populations to be dropping and so on. I mean, I talked to, I've got a large number of chess player friends, and every one of them is single. None of them has kids. And I said, well, you guys, look what you guys have done. And their response was, yeah, who can afford kids these days?
Bingo.
They're too expensive. Who can afford to buy a house? Who can your quality of life as a single, person takes a huge hit if you go and have kids, unless you have a very, wealthy spouse, or your combined incomes make things affordable. So we're in this sort of catch-22. I mean, it's great for the climate population lowering, but so I don't know. I mean, can you comment a bit more on that? I mean,
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, kids can't afford houses, right? The costs have become so inflated that kids can't afford houses. And also job quality has declined. As I say, in Canada, we just have atrocious productivity improvements. And we base immigration on keeping these outdated business models going, the cheap labor models going. And another factor, Canadians don't want, 85% of Canadians don't want to live in big cities, but that's what we're building. So if you look at how people want to live, and they want to live in a healthy community, they typically smaller town, small city, reasonable housing prices, good job, then I think you'll see the fertility levels go up. People will have kids, but if they finally reach some kind of economic level where they're comfortable, they're in their late 30s or early 40s, and the fertility level in cities is lower than the fertility levels out in more rural areas. When the pioneers first came to North America, you had huge farming. Vast percentage of the population was farm or resource based. So you have very cheap accommodation, very cheap cost of living, tremendous access to resources in the early days, and boy, did we produce a lot of kids. And now, if you're in a big city, if you're in an apartment or something like that, I don't know if you've lived in an apartment as a kid. I have. It doesn't function as a community. Whereas I'm down here in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia now. This is a functioning community, and there are kids running rampant around the streets. It's a community where you would be more likely to want to have kids. It used to be affordable, but so many people are moving down from Ontario and BC to a place that they can afford. It's becoming less affordable for the locals. So you know, we're stacking. It, if you say we need immigration to increase, to maintain population or increase population, if that, if we haven't dumped that goal, it's self-fulfilling, because you're making it impossible because of wages, lifestyle, quality of life, and housing costs for young people to have families.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to point out, I forgot to mention, Vancouver fertility rate is 1.1, which is about the lowest. Like the big cities in Canada are much lower fertility rates. So this article that came out today, I'll put a link into the chat. I think I did put a link into the chat, so it references a report on Canada's situation. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, Rob Samulak, do you have a question now?
Yes.
You're in and out, so I couldn't tell for sure.
Yes. So I have a comment and then a question. So
Okay.
I'm working as a nurse, and I see and I also have a young family, and I see the cheap labor comment quite apparently on a day-to-day basis. I go into a lot of homes, and there's a lot of PSWs, and a lot of them are immigrants being paid just over minimum wage.
Yep.
So I see that. My question is, how do we actually get those in power to accept the radically different economic system despite these real physical limitations? The governing party is very much pro-century initiative. The leading opposition party practically denies science. The media is self-served by the current economy. So how do we actually shift public opinion to accept this and force politicians to follow it?
Well, I think public opinion has shifted. We did a public opinion survey, and it's dramatically opposed to, very clearly opposed to the current policy. But moving, like the media, the national conversation has to get healthy somehow. I'm not sure how that can happen. The CBC is biophysically and in terms of talking with Canadians as opposed to talking to them, it's just an utterly failed in its mandate. They didn't expand on Suzuki's program. They didn't, they haven't adopted science, and they've totally failed. They're imposing philosophies that have no application in reality, but they do very well serve the what I call the parasitic overhead. So it's not going to be easy, and I think that we're going to work in spasms. It's going to be in spasms. At some point, this is going to come back to bite, and some politician, maybe it's going to be a showman like Donald Trump, rather than a real reformer like Tommy Douglas or David Lewis. Someone is going to seize on this political potential and make a change, but it won't necessarily be pretty.
Ted Manning is next, and I see Derek Paul had a hand wave, but I don't see anything in the chat. So Derek, you're able to jump in after Ted if you'd like. Otherwise, we can continue with Madeline, and Bill Reese has more to say too. So Ted next.
Hi there. Thank you, by the way, for helping me get my sound and light back on. So I'm glad to talk to you. Okay. I think we're talking about the wrong thing. And I've always thought that we were talking about the wrong thing. And I particularly liked the concepts that came out of David Korten, which is you can't eat money, or the things coming out of Mike Nickerson saying more fun, less stuff. We are largely confusing ourselves with the use of metrics. And when we allow the economic community and sometimes even the business community to divert us into talking about, gee, your life isn't worth enough for us to bother saving, we fly into that whole hole. There are a lot of things going on that have been trying to broaden the conversation. for years, many of us worked in places like Environment Canada and Environment BC and so on, looking at the notion of environmental impact assessment, of social impact assessment, of identifying the very varied functions that the environment and the community supported. Unfortunately, the moment we get down to brass tacks, it's, well, we can't afford that. The point is that our metrics, I think, are all wrong. And I wish I had an answer. But I would say that, just to tell you, some of you are aware that some of us at the Club of Rome are working on the notions of trying to get people to collectively choose the notion of well-being and try to define it and try to provide them with the metrics that allow them to see it. So we are trying to do that. Are we doing that? Some people like the idea. But until we can get the political and commercial enterprises to choose to look at something broader than, do I make the most bucks? Just as John has very clearly identified, it becomes a barrier to virtually everything we'd like to do.
Yeah, well, I want to emphasize that rational argument doesn't necessarily work. There are people, these interests are controlling interests. They didn't get lucky.
Yep.
They're controlling interests. They're manipulating things. And you can see that where the politicians who are closest to the people, municipal politicians, they're standing up and say, look, we don't want 800 new housing units in our town of 2,400. But they're being crushed by the system. And so it's not that there isn't will, it's that the system is absolutely rigged, and that we should point out the people who are doing it. So that's where I think we need, we have enough information, at least we've got enough information for us, and we've got more information, I think, than any politician or media journalist is going to be able to absorb. So I don't think information is the problem. I think it's now pointing out corruption and opening up the discussion, because that's starting to happen. It really is. So I think things are changing. Will they change enough? Maybe not. Will the powers that be implement fairly draconian measures to make sure things don't change? Maybe. That's one of the reasons I asked AI, Chat GPT, because I wanted to see if I could detect bias. Because no self-respecting criminal organization is going to pass up the opportunity to get their hands on an all-seeing, all-knowing tool like that. You have to be able to control the conversation, and that's what they've been doing for 40 or 50 years.
Thanks very much, John.
Okay.
Hey, Derek Paul, if you're there, we'd like to hear from you. Derek.
I've been trying to get him to turn his video and mic on, and it hasn't happened. Go to the next.
Okay.
Okay, Madeline. Madeline, are you there?
Yep. I'm just
Oh, great.
turning myself on here, so to speak. Yeah, so I don't think I think my question is kind of encompasses or what other people have been saying, but the point is all politicians still have growth as an objective. And as I see it, the pursuit of growth renders all efforts to reach sustainability futile, because and subsidies to renewables are simply ways of making money for those particular industries, you know, for so-called renewable industries instead of for fossil fuel industries. And, you know, the talk by Lierre Keith kind of, well, touched on that quite a bit. So do we have to wait for collapse to actually happen before we stop pursuing growth? Because as long as that is the aim, it's all pointless. In the last article I wrote for PIC, I pointed out that the primary energy that is still supplied by fossil fuels, so the very basic energy, it's 84% down from 86% or something like that over 20 years. So virtually no change in our dependence on fossil fuels, despite all the subsidies to renewables. So I throw up my hands in despair.
Yeah, well, that's right. But throw a few expletives in the right direction as well as you go down. But I will say one point that I know Raymond Lurie would like me to make, and that is when we fully electrify, the overall demand for energy will probably be 60% lower. So that changeover can maybe less dramatic than we think it is, but
That
it
will
might
not
be.
be voluntary, I don't think, fully electrified.
Well, yeah, you have to going to make it voluntary with highly involuntary price increases.
Okay, but then if the politicians are still pushing growth, I mean, like here we have Trudeau imposing a carbon tax and bringing in way more carbon, emission creators who increase their emissions fourfold by coming to Canada. And then he gets after the farmers for nitrogen fertilizer and says they have to use less, all while reducing farmland by 319 acres per day in Ontario by bringing in people to settle on the most fertile part of Canada, which is Southern Ontario and the GTA. So nothing makes sense.
Well, no, they don't make sense. You can forget about the government as it exists in Canada being rational. And I think once you've come to that conclusion, you can look elsewhere for hope because we aren't going to get any from these people. What I'm trying to do is make people realize that no growth doesn't mean no progress. We can live better, I believe, with continue to live better, or at least live decently, with no growth. But progress can go on as long as we're learning. Progress will continue, but growth in consumption, growth in population, they're both suicidal. So we dump those and just pick up the flag of progress, and that just changed the conversation. So
we're trying.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Claude Butner has a long comment, but he ends it with a question.
Okay.
Which I think is worthwhile if Claude's still there.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if
I am still here.
Excellent.
And I was astounded when I saw a recent JP Morgan interview with Peter Zion, who I both love and hate as a political pundit, because he talks about 50 years from now, we'll still be okay in the US because we have the oil sands of Canada to keep us going. But the fact that JP Morgan actually interviewed him, and I put the link in there at the point where he says, if we're really lucky, we can feed 7 billion people. And they sort of lob that into the conversation, and then they move on and talk about, who's in trouble. Oh, it's Mexico, without the obvious, like, what happened to that billion people that we can't feed? And so my question actually is, maybe this is the crisis. I don't, Bill Rees likes to talk about, we're not going to have any real change until we might need a crisis to wake up the mainstream. I think that's the way he has put it recently. And so it's sort of a comment and an invitation for you to, grab this ball. And do you think that very shortly we're going to see a crisis that would allow dramatic changes in policy?
Well, it depends on the degree. I think we're probably looking at death by a million cuts, and it's more subtle. I mean, we're getting weather events that are extreme, and I think people are being disturbed by this. My friends, particularly the people who go down to Florida and move around, the people I know in Europe, they're getting extreme weather events. And here in Nova Scotia, where I moved, by the way, because it's the place to be in Canada, as far as I'm concerned, when the shit hits the fan. Number one rule being, don't be near any large population sources. it's likely to have, although it'll have extreme weather, it's going to be on the whole, it's going to be more moderate, whereas the center of the continent, not so much. So, people are seeing this, and I think they're becoming more aware of it. I think the public opinion stuff we do, the feedback we get on what we do, this is Canadians for a Sustainable Society. The boomers are becoming more aware of this. I think there's guilt, that we've allowed this to happen and we don't know what to do. So people are becoming more aware, and maybe it will take one big event, but look at just the stream of severe weather across the states in the last 8 weeks or something like that. I follow the weather, and I can't separate. I don't know which storm I'm looking at from day to day. Is it the one we had this morning, or is it the one we had a day and a half ago? I just can't follow it. And I think people are getting the impression that their world is becoming less stable. And that's the kind of opening we need, but we certainly don't need hysteria. And the question is, when is it going to go off like a bomb, or is it going to go off like a rocket in the right, hopefully pointed in the right direction?
Thank you.
Okay, Derek, I see you with your hand up. Welcome.
Yes. I wanted to bring up a point that I may have brought up before, but I don't remember. And I think our speaker made some very nice comments earlier, which are realistic, that in the years to come, we're going to have a lot of unemployment that is due to people whose jobs simply disappear, for example, because of closing this industry, or that factory can't make a profit anymore. I think something that KCOR could address is the need for new institutes to do things on a national basis to rebuild natural wealth. And I am proposing now that 4 new national institutes be organized to deal with farmland, forest, rivers and lakes, and pollution in the ocean. And that these should have a link of some kind with the national bank, and that these institutes would take up a lot of young people who don't have jobs or don't have satisfactory jobs, and it's known that those from sort of 18 to 30 years of age are disadvantaged in our society. And I think there is nothing to lose by setting up these institutes so as to absorb people and make them do useful work. Now, not everybody will want to work in one of these institutes, but I think there's lots and lots of practical work that can be done now to enrich nature.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that something like that is needed, and certainly the way you've laid it out in 4 separate areas, 4 separate divisions. The trouble with doing anything like that, and I think we all understand the scale of work that would involve, is it's going to have to be paid for, and so you're essentially going to be reducing people's consumption. And they're going to say it's a tax of some kind, and it will be, because you're forcing more government or more income into a social the social coffers than into your own private coffer, and your disposable income goes down. And so that's the resistance. I mean, people now, they are pressed to heat their homes and buy food, a huge number of people. And if we load them up with, more of this kind of, it's going to be expensive to, employ, what could we say, 100,000, 200,000 young people trying to rebuild our natural assets, it becomes an expense maybe that people are going to, certainly some politicians are going to say, oh, you know, we don't need that, we don't need masks, and all the rest of it is just more government control, which it is, because it's long-term thinking, and it's thinking on a national leadership basis, which seems to be out of favor in some areas. But yeah, we need it. And that's a good way to approach it, breaking it down. I like that.
I want to just make a comment, because you said it would cost a lot, but there's a huge movement now to get guaranteed annual income. And I'm protesting because that is even more costly, because you have people that aren't working and you're paying them the same as they would get if they were working for these institutes, where you're getting an increase in natural wealth.
Yeah, I agree. I think some social, I call it social justice, but that's probably the wrong term. I'm offending the wrong people. But they think that an income should be guaranteed. I'd put, if I were going to bottom line something, I'd say that we should have a guaranteed employment, and not employment of just usurious levels, but guaranteed positive employment where they're learning and they're contributing, and there's dignity and safety in the jobs. Some work for welfare programs that I've heard of are next to slavery. I mean, the people are treated horribly. So that's we can't have people sitting around. We can't have young people sitting around, doing nothing, learning nothing, and not contributing. That's absolutely corrosive. Being paid to do nothing is the worst thing you can do to someone.
I agree completely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
is Bill Reese still available? Because he had another comment and question about the CBC.
Yeah, I had a number of well, I've tried many times with all of the outlets at the CBC in a very polite way to get them to think of climate change as symptomatic of a much larger problem of population growth and overshoot. I've been rejected at every level. One young producer at the Current was really excited, read a lot of stuff I sent her, and came up with a great proposal, took it higher up, and was shot down. So the CBC is simply unwilling, I think, to discuss any of these issues. Their budget, of course, depends on continued currying of favor with government, and governments have been very unfriendly to the CBC lately. Which gets down to the whole point of who's controlling the conversation here. I'm still quite attached to the university system. But what people are not aware of over the past several decades is the gradual appropriation of the university research enterprise by the private sector. As senior governments have withdrawn funding and we become more and more dependent parasitically on foreign students and the inputs from the private sector, the whole research enterprise is now driven by largely profit-making capacity. Will this research generate future revenues for the corporation? So at just about every level we've discussed at this meeting, the conversation is not being controlled by people who have an interest in the kinds of things we're talking about here. And as I say, the universities become increasingly a kind of a subsidized research arm of the private sector. People really ought to be more aware of this. Nobody wants to hear about it. And one other kind of comment. We all on this group speak as rational people. And our fundamental assumption is that human beings are rational. We're not. People are not primarily rational. We're driven by emotion, by instinct, by the social construction of reality. That's whoever's controlling the conversation. And all of the warning sciences or warning signs coming from science have really made very little difference. We've heard these stories for 50 years, and carbon emissions, for example, continue to go up. I've long since come to the belief, just based on the population dynamics of other species and the previous histories of human civilizations, that the world right now is on the cusp of a one-off population boom-bust cycle. That bust is inevitable. It will happen one way or another, and it's most likely to happen in a way that will be very uncomfortable for most people. For example, the energy question. We've only been able to sustain 8 billion people to the extent that we're doing so because of an enormous supply of abundant, cheap fossil fuel. We're still 82% dependent on that fossil fuel. And for all the advances of renewable energy, anybody can do these numbers. Look up the annual statistical review of world energy. The most recent issue shows you that the growth in demand for energy in recent years exceeds the increase in output by all renewable sources. Even in electricity, the growth in demand for electricity exceeds the output of additional wind and solar, even though it's growing at double-digit numbers per year. This difference is made up by fossil fuels. And these are real numbers. I'm not making this up. And as long as this continues, there's no hope of dealing with climate. But the bigger question is, if you did what people say, stop fossil fuels, the entire global enterprise would implode. Millions of people would be out of work. Billions of people would be out of work. The economy would be in utter chaos. There'd be mass migrations and more geopolitical tension than we can imagine. And that's bad enough right now. If you follow the news from Europe, countries in Europe now are talking about rearmament. The Baltic states are now, one of them, Lithuania, I think, is requiring all new housing to be built with bomb shelters because of the increasing fear of the Russians. The kinds of issues we're talking about are completely lost in this larger global picture of increasing international tension. By the way, much stimulated by the concerns around energy. So we got to think in a frame of difference here, a different framing that anticipates the downturn and what we will be able to do when there are, John, you mentioned living in Nova Scotia to be out of the range of cities. Of course, no city can survive without fossil fuel. I'm sorry, it's just not possible. The provision by fossil fuel. And as soon as the energy system implodes, if it does, millions of people will be invading the countryside from the cities everywhere. Tokyo, Shanghai, cities like that can't survive this century on the track that we're currently headed. And anyway, that's the framing I think of. Look forward to a major contraction of the economy and population. And what we should be doing is planning for that, not trying to stop it by various subsidizations of completely inadequate alternative energy and so on and so forth. And even if it worked, even if alternative energy worked to replace fossil fuel, it would do nothing in terms of overshooting the population question. It would make things worse.
Yeah.
Sorry for my...
Well, no, we on a previous version of our website, we had population cycles, population data going from, I think it was 600 BC, and including a forecast out to 2100 for most countries. I put a huge amount of work into that. Virtually nobody read it, but so it's not on the current version. I'm not even sure if it exists somewhere. But we boom and we bust, and this is going to be the biggest boom. This is the biggest boom, and it will be the biggest bust, without question. But this growth with corporations taking over the agenda, the national conversation, that wasn't an accident. That was on purpose. They knew they had to take control of the media, and the CBC was a little bit more difficult for them, but they took control of the like investment bankers, or I should say hedge fund bankers, American hedge fund bankers control Post Media, and it's a lousy investment. Unless you want to look at the scores of billions of dollars their other enterprises gain every year from enforcing the policies of growth. That's why it's the big scam. Inflation of real estate is the big scam, and if a conversation takes place on that, it won't be because there isn't any opposition to it, because they're there to kill it. They're well positioned, and they know what they're doing. It's a very simple scam. You just have to execute it, which they have done. Anyway, that's enough for cynicism. Is anyone, although it's not cynicism, that's what actually happened. Any more questions, Steve?
No, I think we're caught up, and
Okay. I've got
now in a quandary because I was going to originally have Ted Manning thank you, and then Gene Doherty thank you, and now I don't know who's going to do it because Ted's back online, and
I'm on. I'll do it if nobody else wants to.
well,
It's thankworthy. So
yes, of course. Thanks, Ted.
yeah, and also they're going to usually give me the sign-off numbers to the advertisement for you guys. My impression is that we've had better days and more optimistic days, and my personal perception is kind of a cyclone of circular causation, where we try to outgrow each other, and if he has more, I have to have more, and I have to therefore vote for him because he's the only one who's going to give me more. And ultimately we end up with a circular firing squad. So that whole mess appears to be a fairly graphic expression of where we find ourselves now. And certainly when we look to certain other communities, we can see that they're pretty good at doing this already, and please don't follow them. Anyway, that said, I'd like to thank very much, John, for you bringing these very interesting and good learnings for us, where we can worry about them and, with luck, challenge the club to fix them. We are now into getting about 180 of our consecutive presentations, and they keep getting better every week. We get more people coming, we get more people seeing the YouTubes, going and using them. And so I'll come to the commercial. After all, I've got to ask for more growth too. So I would like to encourage those of you to pay your annual fee, $100 due about last week. And that pays for this session. That gets us the equipment, that gets us the time. So we would ask you to continue to buy in, because these conversations, I think, are certainly worth it. And secondly, if you wish to join the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, we'd love to have you. Everybody here today has asked good questions and made decent comments, and we want to keep that happening. And I would also note, some of you did not notice one of the new co-presidents of the Club of Rome decided to drop by earlier today and say hi. He's brand new. In fact, I'm hoping to talk to him in a few days. First time I met him was over our Zoom. And he does seem to be pretty positive and pretty capable of getting us to talk a little bit more about sustainability and interrelationships. And we'll get back to you with more on that as soon as we find out more. So again, thank you all very much. Please subscribe to our YouTube thing. And I will now give you people the rest of the afternoon off to talk to each other. There will be no recording from this point on, so please feel totally free to stay and talk about whatever you wish. Have a great weekend.